Всім доброго ранку.
Good morning, everyone. Thank you for joining us today. On behalf of the EU4PFM program, I'd like to welcome you at a very interesting event dedicating to supporting involvement of the Ukrainian companies in the EU tenders, and as well as to help EU companies to overcome barriers to participate in tenders in Ukraine. So our event is called From Barriers to Opportunities, the support of SMEs. I'm Alexander Shavkovsky, the Chief Legal Expert of the program. The end of May and start of June is very active for Ukrainian business, for unbreakable Ukrainian business, and this is also a period of looking for new opportunities. Today we are going to discuss it as well. We have a lot of actual data based on the survey between real representatives of SMEs, both in Ukraine and the EU. And don't want to take a lot of your time, so let us get right away to our agenda. I would like to give floor to the team leader in public procurement of EU4PFM, Eric Smizales.
Дякую, Alexander. Good morning and доброго ранку, ladies and gentlemen, esteemed participants of the event. Very warm welcome to all of you. My name is Eric Smizales. I am the team leader of the EU4PFM Procurement Component. For those of us who do not know it, EU4PFM stands for European Union for Public Financial Management. Our component number 2, assists our Ukrainian colleagues to implement the reforms in public procurement area. And indeed, as Alexander already told, today we have a very specific and interesting, and yes, also a bit challenging topic for our workshop: removing barriers for small and medium-sized enterprise participation in procurement market. First of all, to provide the context, I would like to say that neither the European Union nor Ukrainian procurement legislation allows for so-called positive discrimination on behalf of the small and medium-sized enterprises. In other words, it is not allowed to set aside particular procurement contracts exclusively for them. So in the European Union and Ukrainian markets, small and medium-sized enterprises have to participate in the tenders on equal footing with other market participants. Secondly, one may ask, and maybe you have also asked yourself, why to single out small and medium-sized enterprises? Why to even discuss any support or barrier removal measures for them when there are other types of economic operators in the market as well? There are big companies, there are self-employed persons, there are different types of economic operators. Why to single out SMEs? And actually, this is a very good question, which probably has a different answers, depends on who you ask. On the one hand, indeed, in the European Union and in Ukraine, SMEs make absolutely biggest percentage out of all companies, and they employ large number of people. On the other hand, it is no secret that most value in the economy is created in the big companies. They have highest profit margins, highest research and development and innovation potential, and they are the ones driving the economy forward. So what would be the policy aim? What would be the justification of any country discussing SME support? So, in my opinion, there is one evident and notable aim: encouraging small and medium-sized enterprises to grow by tapping into new export markets, and thus essentially gradually turning them into large exporting enterprises, large companies. And there the question of barrier removal comes into play. By removing barriers, legal, administrative, and others, we increase the small and medium-sized enterprise potential for winning the tenders. At the same time, we also increase the competition and chances for better value for contracting authority. So both sides, supply side, companies, and demand side, contracting authorities, contracting entities, are interested in the barrier removal. And so Due to the aforementioned reasons, we at the EU4PFM Procurement Component, together with colleagues from the RAIT group company, have made the research on the Ukrainian SMEs in the European Union procurement market and also European SMEs into the Ukrainian market. The research aims to identify the existing barriers and provide short and medium-term solutions and ideas for their removal, or at least the mitigation, because let's be real, we cannot remove all the barriers, but at least we can manage them. It is not the only research in the field, and perhaps some of the identified barriers will turn out to be familiar to some of you, because I assume that since you are participating today, for which we are very glad, you have already worked and thought about these questions. Nevertheless, some aspects and angles of the research are very interesting, and we have to use every chance to discuss the removal of obstacles, even if they are already known or at least suspected. And that is what we are going to do today. In the context of the elaborated research, I would like to thank to our contractors, the RAIT Group, for working on the research, to the Central Project Management Agency of Lithuania for supporting the research financially, administratively, contract-wise, and of course, our procurement component team members who also contributed very actively to this important work. And of course, it all happened with the support of our partner institution, the Ministry of Economy, Environment and Agriculture of Ukraine, whose support was very important and who may take forward and implement some of the recommendations that stem out from the research. And with that, dear ladies and gentlemen, dear colleagues and friends, I would like to wish you a very productive event and successful work in the procurement policy, practice, or export promotion field. Thank you. Alexander, back over to you.
Дуже дякую, Ерікс. І,
Thank you very much, Eric. And in the end of his welcoming speech, Eric mentioned the Ministry of Economy, and I'd like to remind that this is the body of in the area of public procurement policy. This is our regulator, and I'd like to give floor to the deputy head of the department in the public procurement area, Mr. Mikhailo Mokhnya, who will tell us more about developing the targeted mechanisms to support Ukrainian companies in the EU member states. But before giving floor to Mr. Mokhnya, I'd like to say that there is a special online course containing a lot of important information. It is available on the online platform Prometheus. We developed it together with the Ministry of Economy, and here you can find information about how to better find tender opportunity both in Ukraine and the EU member states, how to prepare proper tender proposals, and a lot of information about why it could be beneficial. And now I would like to give floor to Mr. Mokhnya, representing the Ministry of Economy. Good afternoon. Thank you, Alexander, for the given floor. Thank you for introducing myself. I'm Mikhailo Mokhnya, Deputy Director of the Public Procurement Department of the Ministry of Economy, Environment and Agriculture of Ukraine. Just would like to show my presentation on the screen. The Ministry of Economy and especially my department deal not only with the public procurement, developing the relevant policy, etc., but we also study the EU experience to support our companies in their accession to the external markets, taking into account our Euro integration track and taking into account the future development we are going to support. First of all, I'd like to mention here the importance of SMEs for the economy of Ukraine. So I have the data for 2024, that demonstrate that SMEs is around 99.98% of all economic operators of Ukraine, and they account for 74% of all employment, which demonstrates that this is the basis of our economy. But in this, and here we should also make a comparison not only with the Ukrainian market but with the EU market, and the same research for the same period demonstrates that when it comes to the EU market, it is similar to the Ukrainian one, where there are 99.8% of all economic operators are SMEs, which also account for more than half of employment. That demonstrates that the structure is similar, and so there is a need in SMEs, and this is the basis for both markets, basis for the stability of any country. So, for the economy of Ukraine and the EU, we should speak here about innovations, because SMEs are interested in innovations. They invest a lot in innovations just to be more active in the market. This is an enhanced competition between participants of the market, which is always positive for any market. This is also the development of regions and communities. This is the development of enterprises. These are taxes. This is also employment. This is the future development and stability of economy. Because SMEs, they just ensure the stability of the development, and they also boost the development of economy of any country. And then I'd like to demonstrate the current situation of 2026. And so we have an indicator. This is the business activity indicator. So the highest score here is 100, but now the activity in Ukraine is at the level of 32.9. And in the last year it was 36.8, and this demonstrates that business in Ukraine is becoming less active because of the war, because of the situation in the internal market, and this has a negative impact on our enterprises, preventing them from active development. So there was a survey among companies, and there were such questions as what are the key challenges preventing the Ukrainian business from the development. And so there were 5 key answers, 5 key indicators, including the general uncertainty as for the situation in Ukraine. And so because the war creates this uncertainty, it is very difficult to plan or forecast anything. The stability is impossible. Difficult to predict the development of the state policies. So now we are facing this period of constant changes. So we are amending our legislation also in the face of the armed aggression. And so that's why we see so many changes in our legislation. It is very difficult to adjust to all these changes. But all these changes, on the other hand, they bring us closer to the EU, because a lot of amendments are aimed at alignment of the Ukrainian legislation with that of the EU. So then this is the lack of the demand, because of the inflation, because of the increased prices, and we can anticipate decreasing demand among the Ukrainian citizens, and the companies, they do feel this. Then the limited access to capital. So the sale markets, they shrink. It is difficult to get loans. It is very difficult for the market to develop in general. And one more issue, which is perhaps the most important, as I see this, this is the lack of qualified workers because of the war, because of the migration of the Ukrainian citizens. So now we can feel already this lack of professionals in Ukraine. And I believe that in the future we can see even bigger gap here. Summing up all these factors, I can say the following. So there are following conclusions here. The first one is that despite difficult conditions, our companies keep developing, and they just ensure the stability despite these conditions. Businesses are businesses adjust, they look for the new ways to deal with this crisis situations, and they just look for new opportunities for the development.
Все це породжує системні виклики
All these leads to systematic challenges
перед нашим бізнесом. Що
that our businesses face. So what should we do?
які дії наші
Where should we move?
наступні?
And what should be our next steps? So we see the necessity of systematic solutions to boost the development of our companies. Because if the recession of economy continues, this means that we won't have enough supply for our armed forces, because we need to remember that our business, our companies are home front of our armed forces. So yes, we get support from our partners, but sometimes it is unstable, there are some changes. And that's why, first of all, we should rely upon our own opportunities.
Можна і варто говорити
And here we should and we must discuss the further development
напрямки нашого бізнесу саме у закупівлях.
and the areas of development for our business, namely, this is the possibility to participate in procurement in the EU. Why is it important? Why is the EU market is a great alternative for us, and also the way out from the decreasing development? So this is a big market, which is 2.5 trillion euros when it comes to procurement volumes. These are long-term contracts. We can sign new contracts with the which are stable, with stable payments. Luckily, there is stability in the EU now, there is no war, and this is also a great opportunity for us. This is the foreign currency investments into Ukraine, and foreign currency revenue to Ukraine. This is also integration in the supply chains of the EU. This is the integration of our
Але водночас в закупівлях
companies into the EU that will ensure our further integration. But when it comes to SMEs, there are always barriers
які не дозволяють нам
which
швидкого розвитку, швидкого
prevent us from
відповідно
quick development
є декілька
in this area. And so there are several components here.
говоримо про малих та
First of all, when it comes to SMEs, these are small companies that don't have enough facilities, not enough funding or human resources. It is more difficult for such companies to get access to new markets and to overcome the barriers that exist.
Це ми бачаємо складні
First of all, these are difficult qualification requirements. So our company still work in this area to improve, to be in line with the requirements defined by the EU member states.
але наші
Sometimes they have higher standards, and but our companies are rather active here. So the second barrier is language barrier. The EU member states they publish their tender documents in their own languages, or they have this in Ukraine, in English. And so sometimes it is difficult for our companies to understand the documents, and this makes participation of our companies even more difficult.
інформація про тендери ЄС. Всі ми звикли в Україні, що у нас є
Another challenge is
і ми можемо
dispersed information about tenders. You all already used to that. In Ukraine, you can go to Prozora platform and find all information in one place. Unfortunately, in the EU, we don't see that. As for now, currently, they have a platform to publish announcements, which is called TAD, but it was remembered that they publish announcements from barriers. It causes some problems for businesses because actually the barrier for them is to participate in that large procedures which are published at that portal. But as to smaller procurements, they're usually being published in other platforms which are in most cases local. Another challenge is absence of international certification. It is important to have a single certification system which would be the confirmation of compliance of Ukrainian companies with the all EU requirements. Another challenge, high financial requirements. It is also related with qualification criteria. In the EU, they have quite high requirements to financial condition of the company, and this is the factor of trust. It is the confirmation that the company will be able to fulfill the contract.
Відповідно, дуже складні закупівлі міжнародні, тобто закордонні.
So
Тобі потрібно приводити офіс.
it complicates the participation in procuring procedures because they have to rebuild the supply chains, and also it complicates the participation of MSEs, and lacking in institutional support is another challenge. Very often, small and medium enterprises don't feel enough support to be ready to participate in procurements. How Ukrainian companies can participate in EU tenders? It is one of the most important blocks for me. First of all, they have to participate personally, so they can submit their applications the same way as they do it in Ukraine. Another way is participation in consortia. Since SMEs are not as strong as bigger companies, they can unite in consortia in order to have better competitive possibilities. Also, there are a lot of cross-border procurements. These are global projects which are implemented within a single project, but in a number of countries, which gives more opportunities for participation to such companies. Another possibility is participation as a subcontractor. However, in this regard, there are number of difficulties related to some content issues. Renovation market is another opportunity. It is more developed than in Ukraine since respective procedures are implemented in the EU to bring innovative projects to the market, and also defense procurement cooperation. Another opportunity, Ukraine demonstrates a high potential in this area, so we have very good products which can be presented at the European market, and it can bring good income for the Ukrainian producers. Considering the all said, at this slide, I wanted to demonstrate all this information. It's for a case when Ukrainian company would wish to participate directly. So respective procurements can be found at TED portal, where you can find all the procurements to filter them by type, by subject, and respectively see how can you get access to the tender documents. Respectively, it is necessary to register on the platform, then to prepare the proposal and respective documents, and afterwards to submit them and to participate in the tendering process and further on the implementation of the contract. Subcontracting, participation through subcontracting and co-implementation. This is another way to get to the EU market, but it is very important to remember a number of important aspects in order to work this way, it is necessary to establish partnership with some EU company. It entails a lot of efforts for the Ukrainian companies to find necessary partner to establish a reliable partnership and to reach a significant level of implementation. Even despite you won't need to prepare the proposal, participate in tendering process and prepare additional documents, run through qualification, it will entail considerable amount of effort to find a partner in the EU market. What are institutional interactions EU-Ukraine in the area of public procurements? Main area of cooperation is the harmonization of the legislation of Ukraine in the area of public procurements. Tomorrow, Verkhovna Rada of Ukraine is going to consider in second reading the draft law on public procurements, which brings Ukrainian legislation in this area to the EU acquis. And they will be majorly in line with the EU acquis. So this draft law will help us to get closer to the EU in this regard, and it is going to be a great incentive for the Ukrainian businesses, because after the adoption, we're going to have the same requirements which the European companies have in the EU, because in the EU, many procurements are much more complicated. For example, with negotiations, framework agreements, yes, we have them, but in a different way. So we're going to have them more aligned with the EU systems, also dynamic procurements and so on. So legislative integration would become the first step to understand how procurements are regulated in the EU and get us better prepared to interact with the EU companies and markets. Second point, integration of digital platforms. We have platforms, Prozoro platform, and further integration will help us to get more opportunities to monitor procurements and to submit proposals. Next point, cooperation with the European Commission. Ukraine is on its path to the EU, and cooperation with the European Union is the basis for gradual harmonization of the Ukrainian legislation. Next point, participation of international financial institutions. The European Union supports Ukraine in many ways, and Ukrainian business in particular. For example, EU4PFM provides advisory services to improve Ukrainian legislation and to improve business capabilities. Therefore, well, we have much more such programs like this, which support Ukrainian businesses and public sector. Next point, development of public procurement management system. It means the development of the whole system, starting from the procuring agencies and ending with contract implementation. So it should be a holistic system to help our enterprises to become stronger, to be able to understand the whole cycle of the procurement process. And the last point, support of business associations and networking. It's company to company networks, chain of supply support and so on. What support mechanisms are necessary for Ukraine? Well, we need to establish EU-Ukrainian hubs to support SMEs in procurement processes in order to help our enterprises to have better access to the EU markets. Consultative centers regarding EU tenders are also necessary. Training programs regarding tendering processes, preparation of qualification documents, and so on to help businesses to become full-fledged participators of this system are necessary. Certification programs are another aspect which should be developed to help our businesses to help to get respective certificates. Financial guarantee mechanisms, it's more about support from the state for businesses through crediting, through loans, through support mechanisms. So businesses would have growth opportunities. Digital compatibility or interoperability, as I mentioned already, we need integration of Prozoro system into the EU systems, specifically with the TED, the system which is going to create new opportunities for SMEs in Ukraine, and of course support of EU-Ukrainian consortia, meaning the development of cooperation between businesses to establish such consortia. That's all from me. Also, I'd like to add that procurement market is quite diverse and complicated. Our procurement market is going to get more complicated as well, but it's all about chances. It's all about opportunities because more options means more opportunities. Thank you for your attention. Thank you, Mikhailo, for such a diverse and insightful presentation and for so many facts provided. It is so good that we see a lot of tools available for businesses from the government. Today we speak more about support of the Ukrainian businesses because you understand that our audience is rather the representatives of the Ukrainian businesses. But at the same time, I'd like to know that during the registrations we had questions. One of the questions was, are there any barriers for the registration of the for the companies from the EU to register in the Prozoro market and other procurement platforms? Of course, there are no barriers. They can register there, no problem with that. And accredited platforms also provide opportunities for the European companies. During the last years, we've seen a lot of efforts with regards to the recognition of digital signatures between Ukraine and the EU. So these digital obstacles are being solved as well. And now we are moving forward to a more comprehensive assessment of barriers, which is based on the comprehensive and complicated and large survey which our program has implemented in cooperation with the RAIT company. So with the results and comparative analysis of challenges for the Ukrainian businesses and the EU businesses will be presented by Gintara Jake, the manager of the study company RAIT. Gintara, over to you.
Hello everyone. I will share my screen and one moment. So once again, hi. So I hope everyone is seeing my screen now. Everything is fine. Okay, so I am Gintare, a RAIT representative. I am from Lithuania, and today I will present you results of the study which we implemented last year. And basically, we had two different surveys, as Eric's mentioned you before. The first survey was Ukrainian SMEs, and the survey was about their participation in tenders in European member states. And the second survey was European member states SMEs, and we asked about their participation in Ukrainian tenders. So let's start from the first survey, Ukrainian SMEs. So firstly, let's briefly discuss methodology part of the survey. So as Eric mentioned you, the main goal of this survey was to understand what are the most problematic areas SMEs are currently facing in Ukraine when they are participating in public tenders in European Union. So the survey was conducted from May to July last year, and they reached our respondents via internet. It was online survey. So our target group was representatives of companies located especially in Ukraine. We didn't accept companies who left Ukraine after the war started, and we didn't include currently occupied territories. So our target audience was company representatives who are able to answer the questions. So mostly it was managers, business owners, and so on. So in total, we in the survey participate 207 representatives, SMEs from Ukraine. In this slide, you can see profile of companies that participated in the survey. So as I mentioned you, most respondents are decision makers. Half of them are middle-level managers or team leaders, around 1/3 business owners or founders. Also, the second graph shows that the sample includes companies of different sizes. So we have 38% of companies from 50 to 245 employees. And smaller companies have slightly smaller shares. And if we see locations, so we can see that respondents come from all major regions of Ukraine, with the largest shares from northern and western regions. And looking at companies' business activities, we see that we have 40% of companies which main activity is sale of goods, then provision of service, and slightly less companies which main activity is production of products. And most of our surveyed companies were privately owned. So let's move forward to the main results of the study. Here I don't have time to show you everything, so I will show you only main and most important findings, but all information is in very detailed reports of these studies, so of course you can look in more details if you are interested. So First of all, we asked companies, have they participated in European Union tenders in the last 3 years? And the results actually show that involvement in European tenders is still relatively limited. 37% of companies reported participating in European tenders, and more than a half had no experience at all at this area. So when we see to the second graph, we can see that among those companies who participated, the results are quite positive because most of them signed at least one contract. Those companies which participated in the tenders in European Union, we asked, so what are the main challenges your company has faced when searching and participating in European tenders? We have a result, and we see that the main challenges they faced are requirements in the tender organized countries, and the other problem is technical difficulties when submitting proposals. Also, we should take into account communication and language barriers, and these results overall shows us that companies may need more support with understanding requirements and navigating the tender process. So this result shows that we need to go into more details into this topic. Looking at future participation, the results show positive potential. Around 38% of companies are already actively looking for European tender opportunities, and another 43% say that their participation depends on specific conditions and requirements. So let's move to more details. What problems stops them from participating in these tenders in the future? And looking at these factors, we can see that almost all of them are quite important, because we have evaluations here in a 5-point scale, and we have evaluations from 3.5 to 3.9, these average evaluations which respondents gave, and we can see that all these factors are quite important, but if we need to take the most important 3 factors, we could say that the top priorities are the clarity on technical standards and local regulations, understanding qualification requirements for foreign suppliers, and knowing which procurements are exempt from local public laws. So overall, the result shows that companies are looking for transparency and clear guidance, which could help reduce uncertainty and encourage participation. We also asked companies which improvements in Ukraine could encourage them to participate more actively in international tenders. So the results show that SMEs in Ukraine see customs procedures for export across borders as one of the most important areas for improvement. Companies would like those procedures to become simpler and easier to manage. Another key aspect is access to information. Companies also highlighted the importance of creating a permanent information service that would provide clear and timely information about relevant international tender opportunities. So, finishing the first the first part. Let's go to the main conclusions. As I told you in the beginning, the survey was very huge. We had a lot of findings, but if we need to say like 3-4 sentences about the results, so I would repeat again that participation in European tenders of Ukrainian SMEs is still relatively limited. Only 37% of companies reported participation in the last 3 years. And when looking for most important problems they face, we could exclude legal requirements, technical challenges, and problems related with language and communication. However, the interest in future participation is really high. 80% of companies are willing to participate in the European tenders in the future. So the most important factors which encourage them to participate more actively are related with the processes. They should be transparent, and technical requirements should be very clear, and the documentation standards should be very fair. So we can move to the second part of our project. Now we have vice versa survey. So it's a European Union countries survey. We found SMEs representatives in some of these countries and collected 1,400 answers. So first of all, let's talk about the objective of the study. So the main goal of this study was to identify what problems face European Union countries while participating in public tenders in Ukraine. And the survey was conducted from May to June last year. It was also online survey, and we were looking for representatives of SMEs located in Lithuania, Estonia, the Netherlands, Slovakia, Czech Republic, Germany, France, Poland, and Italy. And respondents were chosen based on their knowledge of research topic, very similar as for Ukrainian survey. So we selected to answer the questions the director, department head, or another relevant manager position. So in this slide, you can see the main characteristics of the companies. So we can see that we have 54% of middle-level managers or team leaders, 30% of business owners or founders, and 16% of company executives or senior managers. Respondents were very well distributed across all surveyed countries, and we have at least 7% participating from each country. So it's quite a good distribution, and looking at company size, the sample is quite balanced with a similar share of small, medium, or larger companies. And half of the companies mainly provide services, while around 1/4 focus on the sale of goods, and another 1/5 on production of activities. Most participating companies also belong to private sector, very similar as in Ukrainian survey. Now let's move to the main results of the survey. Here we have presentation in the first graph of all country results combined, and then we have graphs of each country results separately. The arrows show if there is a significant difference between the countries. So if we have green arrow shows that it's the result is significantly larger, and red arrow shows that the result is significantly lower than the average. Okay, so looking at these graphs, we can see that about 4 from 10 companies have participated in ProZorro tenders. In these tenders, less often participate companies from Lithuania and Estonia, and SMEs from Poland and Czech Republic more often participated in 1 or 2 tenders. And we can see results that companies from Germany more often had participated in 10 tenders and more. The results of participation is quite successful. We can see that the majority of companies have signed at least 1-2 contracts, and larger amount of contracts statistically significantly more often signed companies from Germany. So these results shows that German companies are more actively participate in Ukrainian tenders and are signing more contracts. So looking at the challenges in ProZorro tenders, the most common issues are additional legal requirements in the customer's country, communication difficulties with contracting organization that publishes the tender, and technical problems during proposal submission stage. Also, the results show some differences across countries, so we can discuss them. Difficulties in communication are more important for companies from Slovakia, and for companies from Czech Republic, additional legal requirements are less problematic than for other countries. Also, about the future participation, the results show that more than half of companies are interested in participation in Ukrainian tenders in the future, and 19% are already actively looking for opportunities, while another 37% are potentially interested depending on specific conditions and requirements. Interest is stronger among German companies, while respondents from Estonia and Lithuania appear more cautious about future participation. So we can see that companies from Lithuania and Estonia significantly less often mention that they actively are looking for opportunities. Here we had many aspects related with the tender process, and we asked participants to evaluate them if they are important for consideration to participate in Ukrainian tenders. So results show that average evaluation on 5-point scale are from 3.5 to 3.9. So we can say that almost all of these aspects are quite important, and we should take into account each aspect. But if we have to exclude most important aspect for SMEs in the procedure, is the procedure for providing contract security. This means that companies want clear and understandable requirements regarding financial guarantees and obligations related to contract implementation. Clarity or technical standards and compliance requirements, as well as understanding which procurement are exempt from local public laws, were also among the most important factors. The supplier registration system was rated as the least important aspect, although it still received quite high evaluation, but it's less important compared to other aspects. And when we asked about factors influencing participation in Ukrainian tenders, results show that all evaluated aspects considered highly important. We have average evaluations very similar for all aspects, and none of them stand out. However, when we comparing countries, some difference can be observed. So Estonian companies place greater importance on the quality and simplicity of banking services in Ukraine. They also assign higher importance to the simplification and improvement of Ukrainian legislation compared to companies from other countries. And if we move to main conclusions and recommendations part, we can emphasize like most important aspects. So participation of European companies in Ukrainian tenders is already established, but still remains moderate. Results suggest that there is a potential for further growth. Also, several challenges still need to be addressed. So the main issues remain legal and procedural requirements, communication challenges, and technical barriers. Looking more closely at the tender process, the most important aspects for companies are greater transparency and more predictable procedures, particularly regarding technical standards and tender requirements. So that's it from my side today. I hope if you have any questions, so please get back to me later. Thank you.
Дуже дякую, пані Гінтаре.
Thank you very much, Gintarem. And I think that the statistically confirmed barriers and statistically confirmed concerns are similar for SMEs from the EU member states and SMEs from Ukraine. And this once again confirms that we have powerful common economic environment and area, and so we have common tasks for the EU member states governments and for the Ukrainian governments. And the understanding that we have some common issues help us to think about common steps to overcome these barriers and to overcome these challenges. And our next presentation of my colleague from Oksana Kamyanetska, representative of EU4PFM. Oksana is my colleague, and this will be dedicated to practical aspects and practical thoughts on how we can develop a common market for public procurement for Ukraine and the EU member states to overcome the mentioned barriers and to move on towards integration in different parts of Ukraine to create a common public procurement market. Oksana, the floor is yours.
Дякую, пане Олександре, за надане
Thank
слово.
you,
за
Alexander, for giving me the
представлення.
floor and for introducing me. Dear colleagues, good afternoon. I am happy to welcome you here today at our workshop. Let me share my presentation.
Власне кажучи, мій сьогоднішній виступ базується на
So today I'm going to speak about the results of the comprehensive study, which was just recently presented by Gentare, which identified a number of challenges and potentials for public procurement market for SMEs, both in Ukraine and in the European Union. At the same time, we are moving forward and gradually adapt Ukrainian legislation to the EU acquis, specifically in public procurement area. So simplification of joint mutual access to procurement markets is our overall outcome. I'm going to speak about an overall situation and about proposed step-by-step action plan to remove barriers and to reinforce participation of SMEs in tenders in both markets. So the establishment of such possibilities envisages two sides. But first, participation of the European SMEs in the Ukrainian tenders and participation of the EU SMEs in Ukrainian tenders. So according to the study, we saw that approximately 50 plus respondents participated in tenders in all the EU member states over the last 3 years, and only 39% of foreign SMEs from EU member states participated in Ukrainian tenders. 29% of those were engaged as subcontractors of the Ukrainian companies. An average number of contracts signed per participant from 1 to 5, which to some extent demonstrates quite low level of representation of the companies in Ukraine. At the same time, engagement varies strongly depending on the country. Companies from Czech Republic and from Poland are much more active than companies from Latvia and Estonia. It demonstrates as interest both and the fear to enter the Ukrainian market. SMEs in Ukraine have faced systematic barriers in Ukraine related to procedural and legal difficulties. Also, they face communication and technical barriers while communicating and submitting tender proposals. At the same time, it was mentioning that each 5 company reported about low quality of tender documentation, including mistakes, vague formulations, and so on. What can we say about perspectives of the EU SMEs in Ukraine? Our study has demonstrated that contracts with volume up to 50,000 euro attract less than 1 out of 5 companies. The EU SMEs start to demonstrate interest to the Ukrainian tenders with contracted value from 50 to 100,000 euros. The main expectations of the EU SMEs lie in 3 points: clear and predictable rules, transparency of technical requirements, clear requirements to the contract security. On the other side, the situation for the Ukrainian SMEs in the European market is as complicated as for the EU MSPs. So what are the markets of interest? The participation in general is limited for the Ukrainian companies and faces a lot of barriers. Main structural barriers we can observe for the Ukrainian SMEs. Well, already mentioned by Gentara and by Mihailo, but it's worth to mention the following. These are administrative complexity, complex paper-based work, absence of the situation when absence of one document can cause rejection of the proposal and so on. So very often businesses face such situations, and after barrier lack in information, some specific country-specific or tender-specific information, low quality translation of tender documents, language barrier, which in its turn cause difficulties in preparation of financial proposals. Many contracts require a high level of revenues, and Ukrainian companies very often cannot provide it. Another barrier is the high prices for the preparation of tender documents, which require technical and legal expertise, high costs for preparation of documents, and with unclear perspectives. So very often companies tend to not to submit proposals if they don't understand what will be the outcome, because it causes huge costs for them. Another very important aspect is the fragmented market of the European Union. Ukrainian companies have to navigate in more than 2,000 procurement portals overall in Europe, which is a huge load for limited human resources of such businesses. SMEs won majority of the contracts by number, but only 29% of them by price, because in the European Union, as in Ukraine, large companies and big businesses prevail when we speak about large contracts. Also, we hear increasing interest of SMEs in participating in such tenders. At the same time, they are in need of training programs to support their capacity to participate in the tender procurement. So what are our strategic goals for the support? As to the proposals to support Ukrainian to EU SMEs, well, let's start from the Ukrainian ones. In order to transform the identified challenges into real actions, it is offered to develop the complex of complementing measures in 4 areas: legal, approximation, digitalization, well, here we speak more about the integration of Prosoro with the EU systems, development of legal tools for partnership establishment, and so on. The third block, potential development, meaning training for SMEs and procuring agencies and so on and so on. And as the financial support, it is necessary to support businesses with guarantees, loans, credit lines, compensation schemes, and so on. We speak about broader perspective of support measures and expected results. So first of all, what we would like to underline the following key measures, which we have identified as most critical ones. So in order to support Ukrainian SMEs, first of all, both from the side of the Ukrainian government and through the European partners, these are first of all such measures as intensification of harmonization of legislation to bring it in line with the European directives, implementation of environment favorable businesses, strengthening of monitoring and reporting mechanisms to properly track integration of SMEs into the EU markets, consultancy services, and capacity building, which is really necessary for our businesses according to a study. Also, establishment of business bridge and consultancy centers and B2B platforms in order to provide Ukrainian SMEs recommendations on EU procurement policies, trainings on tender processes, on establishment of consortia, what are the forms, what are the risks and deficiencies, facilitating digital literacy of businesses, trainings on use of available portals, also additional trainings. So, well, I would like to recall what Alexander has mentioned, our online training, which gives us the opportunity to study your opportunities, how to get into the EU markets. Also, popularization through the Ministry of Economy websites regarding different opportunities and educational programs, organization of workshops. Definitely, we are in need of them, and we are very grateful to the Ministry of Economy and Prozora for providing such a significant informational support to such initiatives like we have today, and financial support and incentives for co-financing regarding shared cost coverage, certification, preparation for tenders, quality observing procedures, and even compensation of costs for participation in some tenders for some businesses, so they would have an opportunity to get refunds for the participation, and also support in participating in different incentives of international financing organizations for businesses to participate in different initiatives available for them. What is the aim of that? Such participations allows them to get prepared to submission of their applications in different tenders. Also, facilitation of partnerships and consortia, as mentioned already, and colleagues have referred to that, and Kintara, that there is a very important stream of cooperation between the businesses. So, development of this system for communication between businesses will be very beneficial. Support of platforms for the establishment of cluster platforms to help Ukrainian SMEs to join the EU's consortia or establish new ones, encouraging participation in industrial dialogues and strategic partnership dialogues to promote networking and advocacy, enhanced access to the information regarding tenders. For that, it is necessary to develop convenient tools for businesses and SMEs. Here we speak about P2P platforms, then full integration of Prozora's system with that which is being implemented already today thanks to the support from different donors, and again facilitating the cooperation with respective initiatives and platforms of the EU, and facilitation in increasing transparency, and of course monitoring of effectiveness of all these processes and implementation of measures, where the key institutional structure should be the Ministry of Economy within the framework of EU-Ukraine working group format. How I suggest to implement that? It should be done in the well-structured staged plan. So there is a plan for 2024-2026, and in the draft of 2027-30, we suggest 3 stages, which will help businesses to get engaged into tenders even more. So the first stage is only for the 1 year. It's first of all the launch of information campaigns and the program of SMEs readiness, piloting of bilingual tenders, preparation of guides, help desks, and so on. So here we speak at this stage about information raising campaigns, consultations with business, what are the priorities, what needs more attention, so businesses would feel more support from the state. And again, if we speak about the stage 2, it's more profound, midterm stage. It's about consolidation of efforts, permanent trainings, establishment of information portals, support of partnership and consortia with international partners, promotion of digital transformation of small and medium enterprises, and digital procurements through training of users. And the next stage is longer and more oriented at long-lasting effect. It envisages more systemic integration of Ukrainian procurement market into the EU procurement systems, including the monitoring of the effectiveness of such integration and identification of additional elements which should be introduced in order to improve the process and strengthen the capacity of SMEs to participate in tenders. If speaking about target indicators up to 2028, we would see the following indicators as you see them on this slide. So we would like to see 2,000 plus trained civil servants, 500 plus published tenders at the EU portals, and 30% decreased time for preparation and submission of the applications. Also, I'd like to say a few words on a very important aspect, specifically on institutional support from the state and interested parties and the representatives from the business to support SMEs in their access to the EU markets. As to key initiatives, we identify the following. They are based also on the studies conducted. So SMEs in Ukraine would see establishment of association of Ukrainian companies, sectoral catalogs and databases of suppliers, such tool as partner finder tool to find subcontractors, to have that we would need significant support from the side of the Ministry of Economy. Another initiative is establishment of sectoral catalogs and piloting of B2B platforms establishment and so on, which will serve as a tool for the EU SMEs and Ukrainian SMEs, for the companies to find their partners to them. Formalization of memoranda on understanding with business associations of EU and opening up of information channels in the EU and in Ukraine. And of course, is the key executive bodies who can drive this process are the Ministry of Economy and Office and Entrepreneurship and Expert Development, which can be responsible for these key coordinating activities.
And of course, the launching of the annual format between the EU and Ukraine to exchange experience, to share success stories, and to improve the public procurement policy for both sides. And we should also remember that the state has already some mechanisms, some tools that companies, Ukrainian companies, can already use to get access to the EU public procurement market. And of course, these activities significantly mitigate risks that we have identified, that are discussed a lot, but not always SMEs use these resources or these opportunities. Sometimes this is because of the lack of awareness about these tools, or they could be afraid that this is only something declared on paper and not efficient mechanisms that they can use. And so we should speak here about trade preferences and decreased tariffs for Ukrainian companies, financial support. These are the loan guarantees programs and the progress of financial support for SMEs, like EU for Business, that offer softer requirements for loans and also help to deal with the risks our companies face nowadays. Business Bridge Ukraine Ready for You is one more project that offer financial support and expertise on how to improve competitiveness of Ukrainian companies at the EU market. There are also educational and training services, the consulting services, there are different workshops and activities under the auspices of the Ministry of Economy and the Office for Business for Expert Support, and we can see the digital development of our country. There is constant political and administrative support, and we can see this today. I would like to thank Mikhailo for finding time today and join us. And to the support of SMEs in providing access to the EU market, which is achieved through harmonization, expertise, the development of innovative potential, and also the creating the favorable conditions for this. All these things are already here. This is what the government of Ukraine does, and also covering different adjacent areas. And of course, there are loans and guarantees from the European Investment Bank, for the European Investment Fund. There are other funds and initiatives to enhance capacity, to strengthen capacity, and to ensure development and digitalization, the increased transparency. All these things help Ukrainian SMEs to see the opportunities that are there at the EU market, and also for them to be more courageous to try themselves at that market. And as for the key challenges for SMEs from the EU in Ukraine, and Gintara has already mentioned this today, but I'd like to highlight the key elements. This is regulatory ambiguity and this bureaucracy and lack of full harmonization, because our legislation is not fully in line with the EU standards, so there is lack of a full understanding of how this process is organized in Ukraine. And the constant reforms, amendments of our legislation, especially in the face of war, require from the EU companies the permanent adjustment to our situation. Not all enterprises are ready to this. The next element, this is the bureaucratic and administrative burden. Of course, these specifics can be found in all countries, but we have our own peculiarities. There, we should speak here about requirements to localization of how to properly submit relevant documents, procedural risks. This is so we still can see the dominating criteria of the lowest price, and this also prevents EU companies from participating in our tenders. Of course, cultural and market specifics, like different languages and different cultures of Ukraine and the EU member states. This can also be a challenge when establishing partner relations between the EU and Ukrainian companies. What are the mitigation strategies I'd like to mention here when it comes to SMEs from the EU? So, of course, this is monitoring for reform. These are consultations, advisory support. These are more proactive strategies from the EU member states, more daunting strategies. So there is a need of constant update of the knowledge of local legislation, involvement of domestic consultants, and this market in Ukraine is rather well developed. We have a lot of information resources. We have a lot of professional consulting companies and services. The next thing is, of course, the use of cooperation programs. EU companies have also these opportunities. They can constantly update information base to learn more about opportunities, projects of the European Commission in the international financial institutions in Ukraine. So this is also a partnership with local companies through consortiums and also with the reliable Ukrainian SMEs. This can significantly improved the chance of the EU companies to meet tender requirements in Ukraine. And also the issue of transparency, the compliance requirements to minimize corruption risks. Of course, digital tools and also to discover Ukrainian resources like Prozora, etc. And of course, active dialogue, active participation in international conferences, forum to exchange experience and to establish contacts with buyers or with the customers from Ukraine. So all these offers possibility. All these things offer possibilities to the EU companies, but here more active and proactive involvement of the EU companies shall be ensured. And generally, when it comes to systematic support of SMEs from the EU and Ukraine, the following steps are recommended. To ensure partnership, which will be a win-win situation for EU and Ukraine's companies. First of all, these are simplified procedures, harmonized requirements with the EU acquis, so improved document flow, improved templates, platforms using both languages, Prozora TED, help desk for foreign participants from the EU in Ukraine and from Ukraine in the EU, systematic support, business associations, B2B platforms, financial tools, anti-corruption monitoring. And the corruption risk is still frightening for the EU participants, but in our country we have rather strong public control. So this is again about awareness, this is again about not being afraid to access the Ukrainian market and to participate in Ukrainian tenders. And also when it comes to the future strategy for 2027-2030, there should be a separate section about how to support SMEs in the EU member states and how to involve the EU companies in tender procedures in Ukraine. And this will lead to creating common market, in particular a common market in the area of public procurement between Ukraine and the EU. And I'd like to say that that close cooperation between Ukraine and the EU in the public procurement opens new possibilities for SMEs, and this will also strengthen the economic links between Ukraine and the EU. And your support as stakeholders, as businesses, your participation is a key to efficient integration and for developing transparent and efficient public procurement market between the EU and Ukraine. Thank you very much for your attention today, and I hope that we will be able to continue our dialogue and we'll continue our discussion. We will be happy to get questions from you. Please do not hesitate to contact our project. Thank you for your attention and good luck to everyone. Thank you very much, Oksana, for such detailed practical information in such a short period of time, and thank you for reminding about online courses. And I'd like to mention these courses once again, because this is free, efficient tools offering a lot of useful information. And Oksana has mentioned the Office for Developing Entrepreneurship and Expert. This is a state institution that supports Ukrainian business abroad. And I would like to thank Anna Milenina, who is also representing this institution. And today she will present the practical cases of the Ukrainian companies abroad, in particular when it comes to public procurement markets. Anna, the floor is yours. Please unmute yourself.
Будь ласка, допоможіть нам зі звуком.
Please, our technical support team, help us with this sound.
Перепрошуємо за цю технічну незручність. Зараз звук
Sorry for
вімкнеться.
these technical issues.
Здається, в нас там невеличкі проблеми саме з підтримкою інтернет-зв'язку.
So I think there are some issues with the internet connection.
З боку провайдера інтернет-послуг зараз це питання
So
вирішується.
this is the issue of internet provider now.
Колега, а давайте так, ще спробуємо чути зараз.
Dear colleagues, let us try it like this. Can you hear me now? Yes, we can.
Так, то
Зараз
можна.
почути, так.
Yes, we can hear you now. That's
Не
great.
зрозуміло, що це були за
It's
моменти,
unclear
але, Олександр,
what
дякую, що, по-перше,
has
запрошували
happened, but
комісію
Alexander,
на
thank you very
цей
much
ефір.
for
Вітаю
introducing
кожного в нашому
me,
сьогоднішньому
and I would like to
вебінарі. І
welcome
насправді
all
вважаю, що
participants of
саме
our
такі
today's
проекти
workshop
роблять український бізнес
and
ще
webinar,
сильнішим,
and I believe that
дають
these
змогу практичної
projects,
корисної
they
інформації про те, яким
they help to
чином бізнес може
strengthen
рухатися
Ukrainian business that allows business to understand better how to deal with procurement in public procurement in other countries. Today, I'm happy to share with you the knowledge that I got while cooperating with Ukrainian business. You can see my presentation now. And today I would like to be as useful for you today as possible. Can you see my presentation, Alexander? Yes? Okay, then we can move on. I'm Anna Milenina. I'm the counselor of the Director for Export Promotion Office, and over the last 10 years I've been working with the Ukrainian companies when it comes to public procurement abroad. And today I have this opportunity to share with you some practical knowledge from everyday activities of Ukrainian companies. And today I would like to share with you what our office can offer to you and that you can already use.
So I'd like to concentrate my attention on main aspects which would be of interest of the Ukrainian business, no matter are they newcomers or if they wish to make their work more effective and compliant. So to work in international markets, Ukrainian businesses should take into account four major aspects. First one is the national legislation procurements. This is a very important issue because each member state of the EU has its own public procurement legislation defining major principles, even despite the general rules are included into the GPA. So if you wish to work with tenders of a specific EU member state, you should remember about national aspects and national provisions. The next peculiarity, which is very often impact the strategy of Ukrainian businesses, it's the language of tenders. In most cases, the tender language is the language of the country where the tender is organized, because you should be careful with that, because actually all the communication will take place in the language of that country. So the tender documents usually contain the provision about the language of communication, and it is very important to adhere to these rules. I'd like to provide a practical example. We had very interesting cooperation with Ukrainian business which participated in the French procurements in one tender, and according to the procurement documentation, the French language was the main language for the communication, and Ukrainian company, using the right to ask clarifying questions, has written their questions in English language, and they didn't receive any answer from the French customer for a long time, and only after the business provided the questions in French, they translated it into French, they received a feedback in a very short time. So this example is a bright illustration of a language specific specificity, because contracting agency, procuring agency ignored the questions which were posed in different language, not in French. We hear and see many such examples, and tender language is a key factor which should be taken into account when you select tender proposals which are interesting for your businesses. The mechanisms of tender proposal submission, it is also another very important aspect, because We still see GPA countries which do not use electronic format for tenders. Canada is one of the most recent examples. Canadian procurers organize a lot of tender procedures for considerable amounts of funds for large budgets. And Canadian markets is very interesting for Ukrainian businesses, both in terms of public procurements and as regards to ordinary export operations. And to speaking about this particular case, we have to understand that considering that submission of tender proposals in Canada is paper-based, we have to remember that our proposal should be sent by regular post in paper form, including all the annexes envisaged in tender documentation, which should be mandatorily included into the tender proposal. And what is most important, you have to take into account the delivery time in such a way that it should take place before the deadline of tender proposal submissions, because if your proposal, due to some reasons which may not be in your hands, will be delivered to the specified address after the deadline, your proposal won't be opened and considered, because it will be treated as the one which was submitted not in the deadline specified. So considering Ukrainian experience and experience of majority European countries with the digital procurements and the respective mechanism of their submission, it is very important to remember that there may be some national factors, some national aspects in work of this or that mechanism for your submission to be consistent and appropriate. I suggest you to study the technical aspects of submission mechanism if it's digital in respective country. Another very important aspect is the logistics. Tender process itself envisage that the company which is going to provide services or goods should ensure the logistics on its own. This is a very important aspect because it is going to impact the price of your proposal, whether it will be the price for the unit or for the whole project. So it is important to remember that this price should also cover the issues related to the logistics, delivery of your goods to the customer. Within the framework of all these aspects I've raised recently, I'd like to mention that it is very important to thoroughly study tender documents of respective tender, because this is actually the document which is the most important for any tender procedure. Tender documents are going to contain all the key aspects related to the specific procedure you have interest in. There you will find information about all the possible deadlines, about the language, which is the language for the tender procedure, language of submission and communication, and if there is an opportunity to use English language. This information will be indicated in the tender documents. In the tender documents, you will also be able to find the pathways for the delivery of the goods for a specific tender, or the format of the implementation of the task envisaged in the tender document. So all these aspects will be outlined in the tender documents. So all that brings me to another recommendation for you. When after studying the tender documents you feel that you still have questions, please do use your right to pose questions and to receive additional clarifying information regarding specific tender procedure. But I'd like to remind you that you should do it in line with the procedure and deadlines indicated in tender documentation, because to implement this right, you might have a specific deadline, and you should pay your attention to the deadlines indicated in the tender documents, because if you ask questions beyond the deadlines, your questions will be ignored and you are not going to get answers to them, because that's what tender documentation says about that. So please do remember about all these aspects. And when you choose your strategy in international public procurements, be very cautious and careful in reading tender documentation, because it actually contains a lot of details which will help you to become efficient in your procurement process. Of course, it's very difficult to provide you too many recommendations in this limited time I have for my speech. Since I understand that I won't manage to do that, I invite you to the business portal, which is managed by the experts from our office. You can visit the public procurement guides section, and as of today we have a lot of different practical tools available online and available publicly. At this portal you can easily read them, use them, familiarize yourself with them in order to make your participation in public procurements even more efficient. Should you have any additional questions regarding public procurements, please do remember that in our Office of Entrepreneurship and Expert Development, we have the possibility to provide you consultations. Unfortunately, we cannot guide you through the tender processes as such, but we can help you with key questions which you might face during your move along the process of international public procurement. So any questions in this regard, you can send us your questions and we will help you to understand how to make your participation even more transparent, even more clear, the one which would lead you to high quality and productive results and long-term cooperation with international partners. Dear colleagues, I'm very grateful to you for inviting me and for this opportunity to share our experience of working with Ukrainian businesses, and I really wish all the participants of today's event a very productive participation in international procurements. Thank you. Thank you, Anna. I believe that our speakers have demonstrated how it is possible to deliver a lot of information in a very concise manner, along with recommendations and examples, and we are moving along with our schedule. And then now I'd like to give a floor to give the conclusions, Mr. Eric Mezalis, team leader of EU4PFM Procurement Component.
Thank you. Thank you, Alexander. Thank you all participants and of course all the speakers for the very interesting event that we had today. Perhaps if I would have to single out a couple of things that we heard today, I think it was very interesting that we heard that, of course, not all the SMEs are looking for the participation in the foreign export markets, and I think it's a normal thing. You cannot ask, you cannot ask for it for them. There will be just selected ones who would think about this. But out of those who participate, the success rate is quite high. It means that if you participate, your chance of being awarded a contract is actually quite high. And I think this is very encouraging message that we have to make known among the SMEs, because we could easily imagine that among some of them there are some perceptions that that it's maybe hard, it's impossible. But what we heard today is that no, actually this is a fully possible and realistic thing. We also heard today that there are several options on how to participate. It doesn't mean that the company going to the export market participating in the public procurement need to do it as a general contractor. It can go into a consortium, it can go as a subcontractor, it can use some support instruments that are available. So actually there are wider opportunities than we sometimes think, and this is also quite encouraging message. We also heard today about many practical things that are important, and here I would fully agree that on the one hand, the market, the public procurement procedures give the possibilities, but at the same time, there are still some things we have to comply with. And here, our last speaker, Anna, kindly mentioned very important but practical things which we as a procurement practitioners know, such as complying with the deadlines, such as thinking about the language, how the tender is organized, knowing the local environment of the country. That will also for sure help. And I would like to conclude with saying that perhaps there is no one magic solution, one magic stick, which could solve all the challenges. But we saw today, and our colleague Oksana presented it, that there are several working directions on which we have to work. And I think if we manage to increase the participation of the SME due to solving, or at least partially solving every one of those aspects, we would be already successful. So I would encourage you, dear ladies and gentlemen, to work in this direction. To the companies that are participating today, I would definitely encourage you to take part in those tenders, to try. Maybe do not start yet by those countries where, as we heard, the tenders are still going on paper. It will be harder, but start where they have a decent electronic systems and you could submit your bid perhaps by not, investing in the paper signatures, stamps, and these kind of things, and just try your luck, because on the more serious side, you have to know that this process goes both ways. While you are exporting to the EU countries are, looking for the ways how to export in Ukraine, and they will compete with you here in this market. And this is normal. This is normal capitalistic competition, and if they are exporting to Ukraine's market, you have to export to the EU market. And in this process, everyone will benefit, and the consumers will get better price, and you will get the new business opportunities. So indeed, as speaker said, please stay in touch with us. Please consider those export opportunities, and I hope that we will meet again after some time, and there will be already better statistics and success stories to hear. So thank you to all of you. Thanks a lot for the speakers, for our project colleagues who organized this workshop. to the Ministry of Economy, and I would also like to thank the interpreters that made this event possible. So very best of luck to all of you, and till the next time. Goodbye and до побачення.
До побачення, дякуємо. Ерік, дякуємо всім, хто взяв
Thank you very
участь.
much, Eric, and we are very grateful to everyone who participated. I'd like to remind you that the record of this webinar is going to be available. Please do share the record with your partners, with your colleagues. It will be available at the YouTube of our program and in Facebook. And to rephrase in the Franco's words, proceed and you will succeed. Have a good weekend. Goodbye.
Все, всім дякую, трансляцію закінчуємо.
Дякуємо ще раз всій команді.
Дуже дякуємо. Шкода, що нема шампанського в ефірі, чим поза.